Hello, everyone. I'm sorry about the small delay. We were waiting for a group of people who had another seminar going on, but they're just coming in, so we can start. My name is Hrönn Marinórsdóttir, and I'm the director of the Reykjavík International Film Festival. On behalf of the festival, I would like to welcome you to this seminar on Reykjavík Film City. This project has had some time to develop. We had a meeting early on with the mayor of Reykjavík and his team, and decided that during the festival we would draw a focus on what is happening in the city at this moment in time. Soon, hopefully next year, there will be a studio ready in Guðunes, which is a small outskirt of Reykjavík, actually not so small. And we believe that that will change a lot of things here in the city. Today we are hoping that we will discuss both opportunities and threats, both for the Icelandic film industry, but also for tourism in Reykjavík. I would like to thank the city of Reykjavík for their support in organizing this. Also Íslandsstofa, the Promote Iceland organization, as well as Icelandic Film Center for their support also. Laufey Guðjónsdóttir, head of the Film Center, is going to be a moderator for the panel later on. I also would like to thank the Nordic House for giving us this space here. Vera Sölvadóttir, my colleague, she is going to introduce the participants. But the setup is that we have 5 main speakers that will speak first, and then we have a panel where you can also address some questions. Vera.
No, takk. Yes, we have Sveinn Birgir Björnsson here from Film in Iceland, who's going to open up this panel, and Leon Ford, also the Associate Director of Olsberg SPI. Thomas Gammeltorff is here from Copenhagen. He's the CEO at the Copenhagen Film Fund. Then we have Baltasar Kormákur, who is a director and a producer, and Ragnheiður Elín Árnadóttir, former Minister of Industry. There will be no break on this panel, but we also have with us Dagur B. Eggertsson, who is not here at the moment, but he will arrive at 4 o'clock or so. He has another speech he's giving at the moment. Then we have Kristinn Þórðarson from SÍK, which is the Association of Icelandic Producers, and Thierry Potok, who is chairman of the board of Ísold, which is the first Icelandic private film fund, film producer, and former CEO of Babelsberg Film Studio in Berlin, and MPN Studio in Cologne, Germany. So this is the right order, and I think I will introduce Laufey now. Oh, Sveinn can just start. Okay, gjörðu svo vel, Sveinn.
Good day. Happy to be here and get the chance to talk a little bit about what we do at Film in Iceland. I represent Film in Iceland here today. Film in Iceland is a part of an organization or an entity called Promote Iceland, which is a public-private foundation tasked with promoting Iceland abroad in across various industries, tourism, foreign direct investment, and film being one of them. The main objective of what we do is to promote the 25% reimbursement scheme that is in place here in Iceland. There's 25% of all costs incurred during filming and production of TV and film material here in Iceland is eligible for a refund. In addition, we promote Iceland as a destination, or sorry, as a filming location. and promote Icelandic production and service companies. So we do this mostly through, obviously, the website Film in Iceland, which is sort of a one-stop shop for information on filming in Iceland, the reimbursement scheme, and the production companies. This is all done in very good cooperation with the production companies and production and service companies here in Reykjavík and here in Iceland. A lot of this work is focused on just building connections. This is building connections with location managers, with directors, producers, investors, and so forth. This is a photo from the Location Expo in London, where we are every year, and other location expos around the world. We do a lot of fan tours as well with especially location managers. Here you can see sort of the development in the number of inquiries per year. There's the direct contact made to us regarding the possibility of filming in Iceland. So you can see this has been steadily growing. You see 2 years there, we actually went down a little bit. That's during volcanic hours. Just to give you a little glimpse of what sort of project we've been assisting in the last few years. There's a list of films being filmed in part in Iceland. And we have some big titles. Now this is a little mathematics for you. The economic effects of the rebate program. So you can see the blue number at the bottom. It's the total expenditure on production in Iceland from 2010 to 2016. And then you see the 20% that is the rebate of that. And the bottom blue number, 13.3 billion, that's the amount of Icelandic kroners left in the economy following the production. So this is how much the filming industry leaves in Iceland during that span. And you see here 20%. Today we have a 25% rebate rather than 20. Thanks to Ragnhildur. Here's another exercise in mathematics for you. You can see the red squares there. Show the percentage of people who name films as the #1 reason for visiting Iceland. This is what the name as the top of mind associated with what gave you the idea to travel to Iceland. So if we use that number to calculate a little further, you can see it's just about 20% that mention film as the #1 reason for coming to Iceland. Divide that by the number of tourists in Iceland in 2016. Multiply by the average spend per visitor. And the number we get is 55 billion Icelandic kroners. And we consider this to be a conservative estimate. So that's my introduction. I have a little showreel to share with you before I leave.
World premiere.
World premiere, yeah. World premiere at RIFF. It's the first one. So enjoy.
Thank you. Sveinn Birkir. I would like to introduce Leon Ford.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure I can follow that show, but I'll try. I'm here from London, from a company called Osberg SPI. We're a consulting firm that work in film and television. I'm going to talk to you about the economic and cultural impacts of film and TV production that we've encountered through our work. I'll talk you through some economic impacts, some cultural impacts, and then introduce you to a study that we've published this year on how film and TV production is unique in how it drives the wider creative industries, which is a particular focus of many governments around the world at the moment. Just a brief introduction about our firm. We're a consultancy firm focusing on film and television, as I mentioned. In terms of the subject today, the production type work that we do, we design incentives, we calculate the economic impact of incentives. We've been involved with feasibility and business planning for production studios. And the interesting area that's increasingly a part of what we do is measuring the effects of screen tourism and helping agencies create strategies to maximize screen tourism. So just to provide some context, screen production is absolutely a global opportunity right now. Consumer demand is extremely strong. We're seeing huge proliferation in digital platforms. Device take-up is obviously very, very broad. And at the top end of the production market, budgets are very, very high. Producers want to ensure their productions have standout in a crowded content marketplace. So we've seen budgets rising by a huge amount over the last decade or so. What that means is that production is now truly global because the producers who are making these very high budget projects are looking at cost savings and looking at producing those projects in territories where they can reduce some of their costs. The production location decision is absolutely about where in the world can this be made effectively and cheaply. That's created opportunities for cities, for regions, for countries who can attract this very valuable production. And just some context about production levels that we're seeing. The bottom left, we have global feature production last year. Over 7,000 feature films were made around the world. We don't have the same data for TV drama, but on the graph on the right, we see the number of TV drama series that were screened in the US last year, 455. That's over 50% rise in 5 years. So to talk about economic impacts, first of all, these industries are extremely impactful economically. Firstly, and most obviously, there's direct expenditure. If you're a city or a country that is able to attract a healthy throughput of production, you have direct expenditure. As I say, budgets of many projects can be very high, so we see a large amount of expenditure coming into an economy. In the UK, where I'm from, we had over £1.6 billion sterling of feature film spend last year and over £700 million of high-end television spend. High-end television is the definition given to TV dramas by the UK tax incentive. They're budgeted at over £1 million per hour. So there's a huge amount of potential for economic impact, direct spend economic impact. In addition to that, you have indirect and spillover effects. So the multiplier effect is from film production, the use of legal services in an economy, etc. And spillover impacts, we're talking about screen tourism and merchandise and other areas of economic activity. In addition to the economic impact, we have seen very pronounced impacts on employment. These sectors require a very highly skilled and mobile workforce, which is, of course, very attractive for governments. The skills that are developed in film and television, if a country has a very strong inward investment production, if there's lots of international films coming to a country, the crew skills, the crews that are working on those films, they still have those skills when they go to work on domestic films. Infrastructure investment is another effect of a healthy sector. So as we're seeing in Iceland, investment in studio facilities, post-production, which in turn will make a sector more attractive to incoming producers and strengthening those economic impacts. And final point here is the fact that these impacts can and do occur very widely across the territory. So if you look at somewhere like Northern Ireland, which hosts the Game of Thrones production, is based in Belfast, but absolutely shoots right across that territory, impacts on travel, hotels, catering businesses right across that country. In terms of cultural impacts, as I'm sure you're all very aware, the film and television sectors can be very, very impactful in cultural terms. Countries with a strong filmmaking tradition, a strong local filmmaking sector, that provides really invaluable opportunities for that country to explore its history, its culture, its character, its future, in a way that's very direct and you know, and thinking about international reach, those productions can be easily dispersed around the world. Film and television are very easy to access for international viewers. It's very low cost, assuming that those productions can get distribution. So there's a really easy channel for a nation's culture and a nation's artistic film and television output to be dispersed around the world. And we see the effects of that in a number of different ways. Screen tourism, I'm going to talk about in a moment. Also, soft power, national branding is a particular focus for many governments. The British Council defines soft power as a country's power and influence being increasingly measured by its ability to inspire and attract citizens of other nations to take an interest in its national story, passions, and ultimately respect its value, ideas, and aspirations. So the idea of film and television as a real conduit for a country's culture and a country's attractiveness to the world, creating links around the world that other sectors just can't achieve. And a very good example of this is through screen tourism. I mentioned that our firm has been very active in this field. We've worked in England, in Spain, in Northern Ireland, in quantifying this relatively new phenomenon of travel based on film and TV content. Some of the interesting things that we've found, I mean, some of these studies can be downloaded from our website, but this idea of authenticity, which relates to soft power, the idea that film and television provide a very direct link between a nation's culture and its ideals with viewers in a way that advertising messages just aren't able to achieve. There's an authenticity and a directness about film and television, the art of productions that link very easily to people and can lead to very pronounced screen tourism effects, as I'll come on to. Marketing is an interesting area. The fact that, as I mentioned, production budgets have become very high for some areas of the industry. Similarly, marketing budgets are very high, so often countries or locations can benefit from the huge amount of spend that's taking place. In terms of value of screen tourists, some of our research suggests that screen tourists can provide value that's higher than the touristic average for a destination. Screen tourists can also come out of season and go to different parts of a destination beyond the kind of established tourism trail. It's very much the case in Northern Ireland, for example. Further development of a sector. Screen tourism really gives operators an opportunity to develop new and innovative products. And just finally, real alignment with wider tourism trends. So we're seeing a move towards more experiential travel, particularly among younger people, desire for uniqueness and visual standout on social media. I mean, screen tourism is absolutely linking into all of those trends. In terms of some of the economic impacts we've identified, in England, we did a study for Visit England, our national tourism agency, and an agency called Creative England, to measure what we call core screen tourists. So these are tourists who visited England or a location in England just because of its screen link. And we estimated that between being 100 and 140 million pounds annually. That doesn't include London, it doesn't include Scotland, so it's a pretty conservative take on it. We've seen pretty pronounced impacts elsewhere. New Zealand, of course. Dubrovnik has, the mayor has estimated 10% of the tourist rise that they're seeing annually is related to Game of Thrones. So just finally, one particular economic and cultural impact that we've identified from a healthy film and TV sector is this notion of film production as a driver of the wider creative industries. The concept of the creative industries is of particular interest to a lot of governments at the moment as we see the decline of traditional manufacturing, those type of jobs. You know, governments are looking for them to be replaced by what we'd call the knowledge economy, so skills and focus based on the creation and exploitation of intellectual property, very high value industries. In the UK, for example, the creative industries are worth over £80 billion. They're growing at twice the rate of the rest of the economy. So they're providing a huge amount of growth. The latest the second quarter 2017 figures, motion picture activity was one of the key sectors in the UK having a GDP growth. So that these sectors are absolutely delivering economically. Just some data about Europe, the EU in general. The creative sector in 2014 was worth around 7% of European GDP, about 6.5% of European or EU employment. Now that was up year on year by quite a significant amount. Creative industries are the third largest employment sector in the in the EU after construction and food. Now that's some of the context about the size and the growth we're seeing in the creative industries. Circling back to film and television, in our work, it would often be identified that if you produce a film, if you produce a piece of valuable television content, as a filmmaker or producer, you're actually hiring and drawing on a lot of skills, expertise, and services that exist outside of that film sector. So you're hiring people who normally work in the theatre sector, in the digital sector. You're drawing on a lot of those creative industries skills in a way that not all creative industries do. It's very unique to the film and TV sector. So we decided to try and put some data on this notion, and we approached 4 agencies that we know well, including the Copenhagen Film Fund, Thomas is here, Filminvest in Sweden, the Netherlands Film Fund, and ScreenWest in Australia to sponsor a report. And we analysed, in order to get this data, 9 different productions in depth. From Australia, we analysed the film Jasper Jones and the TV show An Accidental Soldier. From Denmark, the Thomas Vinterberg film The Commune, and 1864, which is a very high-budget TV drama. From Sweden, A Man Called Erve and Springtide, and from the Netherlands, Blood, Sweat and Tears and Ramses. Now what we did was sit down with each producer and go through their budget in a lot of detail to see where that spend occurred. So whether each line item, if it stayed within the film sector or the TV sector, or it flowed to another creative industry sector. And we found that every single project was impacting other creative sectors. Just the last couple of slides here. These are our findings about the film projects that we looked at. So on the left, in the smaller pie chart, this is the aggregated amount of expenditure from the 4 feature films we analysed. What we found was about 37% of those budgets stayed in the film sector, so they were hiring actors who normally only worked in films, director who would only work in films. Around about a quarter went outside of the creative industries, so into transport or hotels. But interestingly, nearly 40% was going into other creative sectors, so hiring perhaps dancers from the performing arts sector, or musicians who hadn't worked in film, who normally worked in the music sector. So it's very interesting. Although some of those percentages look quite small, 2% going into the music sector, if you think about a $10 million film budget, 2% of that is very significant. And if a country is seeing maybe 20 or 30 of those made a year, there's a real sense of a huge amount of impact from film and television into the other creative industries. And we've seen how strongly they're growing. So the notion really is that if you have a very healthy film and TV sector, you're also going to have a healthy creative industry sector. And just my final slide is this same analysis, but done for the TV dramas that we looked at. And interestingly, the proportion going into the other creative industries was higher in TV drama than film. We think this is because TV drama, in the way that we were looking at, is less established than the film sector. It's a relatively new area of production, these very high-budget TV dramas. But again, a real impact from these productions going into the wider creative industries, both economic and cultural impacts. We call it the kind of creative industries ripple. So it's spreading the impact of spend of a film and TV project right out into the creative sector economy. So that's an overview of some of our findings in the work that we do regarding economic and cultural benefits. We have quite a lot of studies on our website. If you're interested, you can download or do email if you have any questions, or I'll be taking part later. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leon. I want to introduce Thomas Gammeltoft, who's the CEO of the Copenhagen Film Fund. I would also like to tell you that we are being live streamed on the website riff.is, so try all to look your best.
I'll do this. Hello. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here in Iceland, this beautiful country, and I come from a very, very flat place on earth called Denmark, especially the metropole in Denmark called Copenhagen, and I'm running Copenhagen Film Fund. And actually the reason why Copenhagen Film Fund was established back in 2013 was because we saw a lot of productions fleeing out of the country. It is like this, that film production, TV production can easily go somewhere else where the money is, and they have to go where the money is because there's a lack of financing in the market with the digital distribution. The DVD market, which has been a really important part of the financing or the income on a film or a TV series, has simply disappeared nearly. It's taken over by digital distribution, which is next to none today in income, and which means that there's a lack of financing. So productions, film and TV productions, tend to go where the money is. It's like circus traveling around, and we see that. Of course, I mean, many will also go where the locations are, and especially when it's beautiful locations like you have. I'm sorry to say Copenhagen, Denmark cannot compete on that level. But anyhow, we campaigned for this fund, Copenhagen Film Fund, for nearly 10 years. We saw them everywhere around in Europe and in America. In Sweden, they have Film Invest, which is maybe one of the most important film funds, regional film funds in Europe right now. We simply wanted to do something similar to that because we wanted to being attractive to international co-productions in Denmark, in Copenhagen, in our region. We started out with a budget of 5 million over a period of 3 years, so it was 13 to 15, 5 million euros, which is really not a lot. But, and I should say on top of this, just before I go further into this, we don't have incentives in Denmark. So what we are built upon is a subsidy system, which is a cultural subsidy system to support Danish culture, film culture. That's what we have. We have some, and this is national, governmental, administrated. We have, within this system, we also have something called minor support, which is for international co-productions coming to Denmark or make use of Danish creative talent. But it's very few money. So what our money was meant for is actually to say we can support productions coming to Denmark, wanting to shoot in Copenhagen, and with our crafts. And we are not cultural money. We see ourselves as being purely there to create growth and jobs. Of course, we work with culture products. I say products, I know some will hate it. But anyhow, we work with culture, so of course we have an opinion, but it's not the main thing we are doing, we are there for. And on top of this, of course, we also look to brand our region, Copenhagen, and profile our region as, of course, a place where creativity is ruling, but also a beautiful city. So there you have the tourism effects that we are looking for. But mostly important is to say we are there to create growth and jobs. Going to the criteria, we say we invest into, that's how we started out. We wanted to be attractive to international productions. We saw it as, with you guys here, if we could have Interstellar coming to Denmark or any of those big international productions, we would be so happy. And all the politicians, they said they really want to see stars in the streets. We haven't had that many yet because we kind of shifted our direction a little, but I'll come into that. But what has been very important for us in our campaigning to succeed is that we we use a word called additionality, which means that the growth we have made would not have been there without our money. So when we attract a project, it's very important for us to be able to convince the politicians that this production would not have been happening in Denmark or in Copenhagen without our money. It would have happened somewhere else in the world, in Iceland, in Berlin, in Stockholm, wherever, but not in Copenhagen. And that's the word additionality, which has been very important for us in our campaigning towards also what is now, hopefully in 2019, will become an international co-production fund in Denmark. We work like this, that we will only look at productions having a minimum of 40% international financing, because when we say that around 40%, when they have this kind of financing, that's where they actually will travel around. And what we can do is we can go up to, we can invest up to 40% of the local spend. So they have a documented spend in our region, which is of course everything they can spend, hotel, labors, everything, and we'll put it, we can provide up to, or we cannot, but we're eligible to go up to 40% if we have the money. It's not always we have the money, but we can actually go up to 40%, which is quite high. And then of course, to secure that we are, to be sure that the productions that we are entering will actually travel around the world, we need international distribution, important. We also need local distribution, as we are a public and private financed fund. It's very important that the taxpayers can actually see where the money ends. We are what we call hard money versus the soft money, the incentive money. So we take a position, but it's very negotiable. We are very flexible, because we are competing with a lot of other regional funds that also want to attract productions. So we are many out there that actually has the same aim as we have. We don't really care about the language. We can produce in Danish, but it's very seldomly happening. But we would like to back the Danish talent. So it means, and that is something that has become more and more evident in our work, is that Danish talent is key to what we do. But I'll get back to that. But most importantly is, again, we create growth and employment to our investors. And this is just to give you a brief overview on the kind of very many productions we have been involved in. You see we are involved with The Bridge, which is TV series. So we go a lot into TV series. TV series, we find them very interesting because they actually accumulate a lot of spend. And when they are like The Bridge, they are very profiling for our country, even though it's dark and it's bloody. We see that, or we have been told by Visit Denmark, that a lot of tourists actually do dare still to travel to Copenhagen and see the bridge between Denmark and Sweden. And you see also we are into The King's Choice, which is a Norwegian film. And that's a film, Erik Poppe, that we went into because they simply needed some financing, and then they came to us and said, how can we get your financing? Just come and shoot something. You can shoot it in studios, even though it takes place in Norway. It's a Second World War story. There will be things you can do in studios in Denmark, and they did. We do a lot of post, and post, it's not editing, it's not sound mix. It is VFX, because we see that VFX is really, really important in building up a new industry. And I know you have that here in Iceland as well, and we see it as very important to support our VFX companies. We have 3 companies now in Denmark. They're all situated in Copenhagen, and they are among those few that have been chosen as deliverers for the bigger American studios, which is something we really want to support. And there's another reason for that, is that when we look at VFX and the skills and competences they have, they are leaking into a lot of other very interesting industries, like the gaming industries, like the VR industries, like the health industries. And if you suddenly talk into that thing, you will find out that the politicians suddenly get to listen to you, because there's something that is very important with our industry, and that's something you said, Leon, is that it actually links into a lot of other industries. They make use of our storytelling and our competences, especially our digital skills. Then you also see that we went into the house Jack built, which is Lars von Trier's last film. And that is something we said to ourselves is, why shouldn't we, I should start to say, the politicians started to say, when we were established, they said, don't enter into films with Danish directors. That's not your aim. You should really go for the Danish girl, Tom Huber, which we actually did. And which is also very interesting. But what we find out is that those guys, they come in, and you know that here in Iceland, they come in with a lot of their skills. They hire crews, and when they left, they leave nothing really. They give you tourism, which is quite interesting. But what we want to say is, why don't we, because we want to help our creative and our talent globally, that's what we should do. We should enter into a Lars von Trier film and make sure it actually happens in Denmark, because the story about Lars von Trier is he had to shoot in Germany, by you, Thierry, for many years, and in Sweden, but not in Denmark. Not since Dancer in the Dark with Björk, by the way. He shot in Denmark, and now we wanted to get him back. And that production has really made a huge turnover in Copenhagen, a huge spend, which is, of course, as good for us as anything else. And even better, we should say, because it's Danish talent. Then, to make sure that we could actually stay tuned and become a fund that was ongoing, we started out with going to one of the toughest economical agencies in Denmark to kind of get their valuation on our work. I should just say, when we established the fund, there was a cultural agency that came up with some figures, and on behalf of that, the fund was kind of established, and they talked about a multiplier. And when I speak about multiplier, it's about effects. What are the economical effects of what you're actually doing? And they said that this multiplier, so you have a spend here, and then you have a multiplier, and then you end up with an effect. And when we then went to our politicians, and especially their officials, they didn't know what we were talking about. And that, for us, that meant something like, hey, they just said yes to the fund to make it a try period, and then hopefully they could close it afterwards. But what we then did, we went to one of the toughest agencies in Copenhagen and said to them, could you please evaluate us in wordings that officials will understand? Those bodies sitting in there only thinking about figures and growth and fiscal terms and so on, how can they understand the language that we speak, or how could we get to speak their language? And then they came up with this, which is, I mean, it's I don't know if any of you knows it, but I didn't know it beforehand. It's called gross national income. And when you speak in terms of that, and suddenly you come up with the figures that even surprised them, this agency, was that for each 13-cent euros we invest into a production, you get around €1 back, which is a lot. Suddenly that proves to them this is something that they could work with. It just backs you up, Leon, that this industry actually has something to come with. And this is only the effects you can measure. This has nothing to do with tourism. We don't talk about tourism. Tourism is something we have learned in Copenhagen not to speak about, because nobody knows how to measure it really. There's ways, I mean, or you can do it, and of course you can do it maybe here better than in Copenhagen, but because in Copenhagen we've always had tourists. You maybe haven't had it the same way as we had, but I mean, tourism effects is something that we are still arguing, and I know that officials and people that are working with economical impacts, they are still saying, how can we measure that? So we are not talking about that. We are only talking about expenditure effects. Effects on what will they come in, what will they use, how will that money turn around in the Danish system, and that's it. This convinced the municipality of Copenhagen and the region capital of Copenhagen and our other investors to continue the fund, and we are now an ongoing fund. Hopefully, in some years we will have an incentive, and then we can say for the first time that Copenhagen Film Fund will be there forever. It's not there forever yet. We're still somehow trying, which is awful, just trying all the time. What we are working on, we have 3 activity strands. One is the funding, which I'm sitting with. I'm actually sitting with everything because we're only 3 persons working in the fund, so it's not a big thing. Funding, which is finding projects, select projects, and negotiating how much shall we enter into each project with. Then we have the marketing, which is, we have a commission, it's called Film Greater Copenhagen, and it works similar like yours here. We have a website, we see ourselves as a one-stop shop where you can actually talk to our commissioner, and they will guide you through, if you don't know the city or if you don't know Denmark, they can guide you through to who you should be speaking to, all according to the project you are coming with. Then within the marketing, we also do master classes, we do services, we do everything because we see it as a very important thing to also be kind of innovative and cultivating the Danish industry. And we do that in various ways with master classes, summits, things like that, because we cannot enter into development of projects. So what we see is, for us, it's the way we can actually be a part of some kind of development. And then we have the policy development, and that's maybe the most important. And that's where we actually, of course, are building upon the effects that the fund has provided so far, but also taking it to the next level, which is the national track. And that's what we are campaigning for right now, which is we have gathered all the creative visual content industry or storytelling industry, which also includes gaming, animation, into one cluster, and that has been led by our fund, this work. And we have gone to the Ministry of Business Affairs, and they are now looking into actually creating, for the first time, they're looking into an incentive in Denmark. And that's something we're really keen on happening, but we are also a little scared on what will happen if it happens. So, because we don't have humongous capacity in Denmark, I think it goes, I don't know how many crews you have here, 3. We might have 7 in Denmark, but we can see that all those 7 crews, they are nearly fully occupied right now. So putting a lot more money into the Danish industry will not just help directly. So we have to find out how can we do that. Well, I'm coming back to that in a second. Then we have the regional track, which is the fund, and then what we are doing. And then what we said with the marketing, and that's very important, is to what are your values, and that's what you have to do. Everyone who wants to do something like this, wants to work with our business, has to kind of make a SWOT on themselves. What are our threats, strengths, values, and possibilities? And we say we have a lot of Danish talent. We have directors, scriptwriters, among the world's best. We have flexible and small crews, just like you. We can work very small crews, and we are very mobile. We work with the highest technology. We have very skilled labor. And also we have VFX companies that are really state-of-the-art. We have a very simple infrastructure, like you. And we have transparency. The Danes are easy to work with. We say that, but it's not for sure. Trust. A deal is a deal. The last thing I for sure can tell you, that's the truth. And then we say, what shall we do for the future? And then speaking about incentives. We have found out that we don't want to do an incentive which is automatic. First, we will not be able to do that because we can simply not accomplish those productions coming in because we don't have labor. What we want to do is we want to support the Danish industry in a global journey. When we have all these talents, like you have, Baltasar is sitting here, very important director in the world, coming here, going out in the world, making his productions, but also taking productions back to Iceland. That's the same with Susanna Bier. That's the same with Thomas Vinterberg. That's what we want to do. We want to take this talent, go out in the world, let them know that we have money to support your productions, international productions, and drag them back home to Denmark. That's what we are working on. We don't want to be the backyard of US productions, because we've seen that that's what happens many places. It happens in Czech Republic right now. There's not a lot of local industry going on because it has all been sucked up by the American productions. And that's not what we want. We have simply said, and this is kind of echoed into the politicians now, that they're kind of, hey, that's interesting because we have something that the world needs. It's not about only location, it's not about crews, because everyone can have crews. We have the storytelling talents. We have the actors. We have the best VFX wizards in the world. We say that. And when you kind of go into that kind of voicing with the politicians, at least we have experienced that they listen and they kind of say, hey, for the first time we will actually talk about incentive in a kind of a co-production fund matter. So that's what we're structuring now. And it makes use of our labor, use of our talents, and it really encourages for co-productions where there's a split of IP. And that's what we believe in more than we believe in just linking into American productions. And that's how we see the future, at least for us in Denmark. So looking forward to the talk afterwards.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I would like to introduce Baltasar Kormákur, producer and director.
So regarding screen tourism, I just have a little story because I was in a meeting today. I produced and created a show called Trapped, which is about Icelandic people freezing in a pile of snow up north. And we are starting second season, and there was a problem with a location, a small house in Siglufjörður, and the people who own the house has changed the interior. So it's a very different house now, inside. And I say, why the fuck don't we just say that she moved to another house, Hinrika, you know, and we don't have to deal with this. And one person said, well, it's become the biggest tourist spot in Siglufjörður, this house. So it's gonna make the city a bit angry at us. So it's starting to work vice versa, you know, and actually it is real, that is measurable, that people do come to see those things, you know. And the reason I'm here, I'm a little bit lost because I just flew in from around other side of the world. I was shooting in Fiji and New Zealand. And why was I in Fiji? Because none of you can match that. They have 47% rebate, you know. So it's the reason I had to fly all the way around the world. But it also proves that it does matter, you know. The story happens to take place in the ocean. So the ocean there is much nicer than the ocean we had back here. I've done a film in the ocean here, and I know the difference. So, but anyways, but the real reason I'm here is because I had a dream, and my dream was to be able to build up some kind of film village in Iceland. And I very much agree with Thomas. I have never been interested in becoming a backlot for American production. I have nothing against them. I think it's a good addition. But in the end, do we want to be servicing them, or do we want to actually create a viable business here that we start controlling? And having worked in the US and UK and other places, I realized, well, the crews here and the people here, the talent here is just as good. So why can't we be more in control of the productions and build up relationships with financiers and studios around the world and bring it here and be in control? And that's the way you do that, is putting the talent in front of it. So, and I suggest to you, Thomas, and to you, Einar, that you use maybe more of local talents in your pitches. You know, every time Iceland invest or no, Icelandic, what do you call it? Film in Iceland. They only have pictures of Game of Thrones and, you know, all this, and you have Kenneth Branagh and all these people up there. But I do think it's very important that it's all linked to the local talent in the end of the day. And I say this full-heartedly, and I've also put the money where my mouth is by bringing money to Iceland and making shows and putting Icelandic talent in front of it. But to be able to fully make this happen, I wanted to make this film village. And we have been in discussion for a long time with the city, and Dagur is here, and he became a great facilitator of this idea, and it was taking a long time, and in the end, we made a deal that I would buy a big factory called Gufunes, which is actually inside the city, but it's in it's an underdeveloped industrial area, and this is kind of a new project, and we are still developing it and discussing it, how it can be made. And I worked in Pinewood, for example, and it's one of the most boring places on earth. It's just dead, you know. And what I really wanted to do is to try to create something that's modern and alive, and where the idea is now to bring all kinds of different creative businesses up there, which is happening, among with the bigger companies or more industrial, but also one of the ideas that has been discussed and I think is going under city planning, and Dagur can maybe extend on that, is to have apartments, cheap apartments for young people, both working in the industry, and so it becomes a village fully lived in, with restaurants and at the same time, the main business will be films and other creative businesses. So this is we are now kind of the studio is getting ready, but there's a lot to do there. But it's a very interesting, I think from a city what do you call it, city planning. It's an interesting idea as well. 101 Reykjavík, was where, you know, I spend most of my days, is in my mind gone. You know, it's become like Leicester Square or all these places where the tourists take over, and that won't change. I mean, it can be beautiful as such, but it's not. And now there's time to move, and most of the creative people have been there, mostly drinking in the pubs, but I think there is time to move on and create something new, and I think this place, Gufunes, could be the future of that. I mean, I can keep on going about this. I think it's better that we discuss this in Q&A afterwards. I didn't bring the drawings and stuff like that. Maybe Dagur has them. I don't know. but it's a very exciting. It's a new thing for me. It's a very exciting, and I think there is something that, you know, that hasn't been done, not to my knowledge, in this way. You know, there are great places like the Film Bien in Denmark, you know, and that's one of the things we look to, but we wanted to take it to the next level and say, you know, is it possible to live in a film studio, live in an area or film studio, you know, and make it alive so it doesn't die, you know, during the night, and there's actually, you can get decent coffee there during the day. you know. So we'll discuss it later, though. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Baltasar. I would like to invite Ragnheiður Elín Árnadóttir, former Minister of Industry, to come up here. And then we will continue with a panel discussion after this.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. I guess I will be the voice of the politician. We got the introduction, what the politicians said, what the politicians asked for, and I can be the ex-politician that can really tell you what the politicians think, because I'm not there anymore. But the reason for why I think I was invited here is because during well, I was going to say the last government, but we have a little rapid change of government here in Iceland right now. During the government that was in power from 2013 to 17, we changed the incentives legislation and increased the rebate from 20 to 25%. And that was under my ministry, and just to answer the question, how to talk to politicians, I would say to the Icelandic film crew or the film industry and those people represented here is to keep on doing what you're doing. Because I think that the biggest value for me in the conversations that I had during the preparation of this legislation were the conversations with the industry and the information and the statistics and the dialogue that we had. Because it is true, the taxpayer wants to know what their money is being used for. And if you are taking a system and distorting it, like a tax incentive system for one industry is doing, you are giving something to someone out of the ordinary and out of the general sort of rules of the game. You need to be capable of saying, why are we doing this? And the conversation with the industry convinced me in the beginning, and the legislation wasn't due to run out until January 1st, 2016. No, at the end of the year 2016, I came into office 2013, and the preparation began right then. Not at my initiative, but because the industry came to me and told me what the development was in the industry. So we had time, and I think that is very important as well. We had time to do our homework. We did an economic impact study. I wish we would have known of your company, because it took us a while to get the report, because I know this is being streamed, I'm going to be very careful. It took us a while to get the report that we wanted to get, because it was difficult for the economists to understand the nature of the industry. And if the economists didn't have if they didn't get it, how were the politicians supposed to get it and be able to extend something that was difficult to explain? So to make a long story short, we got the statistics, we got the necessary information that we needed to prove the point. And once you have that information, and once you can make the dialogue, once you can prove the point, it's very easy to follow through. And our system has been in place since 1999. It started off with 10% rebate, and we're now up to 25%. And through the course of this 22 years, there's always been political consensus. Across the political spectrum, there was one member of parliament who voted against this when we extended it up to 25%. Otherwise, there was very little debate, and everyone who came up and made or participated in the debate within Parliament were for it. And it even got to the point in the debate in the parliament that we found a way to introduce our other idea that had been developed within conversations with the music industry. Because we wanted, and we had that on our agenda in the ministry, to do the same incentive scheme for the recording industry. Because as was explained here before, the DVD market and the change in technology has changed the film industry. And can you imagine what has happened with the recording industry, where you can get all the music and everything free? So in order to attract more talent and to increase or to establish a stronger recording industry here in Iceland, because we have the talent, we were toying with the idea to mirror this incentive scheme to the music industry. And I think it just kind of, and we had very little time in Parliament to do this, but we had been doing the same preparations and same work within the industry, the music industry. So we had that scheme ready, and I'm very proud that we could finish that in before the government left office. And since January 1st of this year, we've had an incentive scheme for the music industry in place, and it's a new system, but already it's been proven to attract big productions. For example, there's a symphony orchestra in Akureyri that only has 20 members, but they just completed 3 weeks ago a project where for the Viking, the Trevor Morris Viking episodes, 2 fighting scenes that needed 35-member symphony orchestra that were done in Akureyri. All of this has benefited the local community, and all of this goes to show that, and we've talked about the effects on tourism, all of this ripple effects and the economic impact, that's one thing, but the cultural impact is no less important. For example, in that small town, and if you see the music factor, they now have a symphony orchestra with 10 big concerts per year, which would be unthinkable if it weren't for the projects that we're bringing in. So I think the final question, why do we do this? It has been answered here. There's competition, global competition. We want to be in the game, and we have been in the game, and we have been punching above our weight because we've had an incentive scheme. But we need to be on our toes and make sure that we follow along and go with the developments, and what Baltasar is doing with the studio and all of the opportunities in the post-productions, which then makes our industry and even more tighter and better, and provides exciting jobs for our young people. I think this is something that we can't thank more for, and we have the 20+ years experience to show for. And so just in closing, good luck with the future politicians. Keep doing what you're doing, because that works.
Yes, thank you everyone. I would maybe like to ask Laufey to take over now. And welcome Dagur to the panel. And maybe ask you speakers to have a seat.
There are many seats.
There are many seats, so we can see your faces. Yeah.
Moderator. Þið rúlið þessum á milli, þessi er til að svara spurningum.
Þannig að, já. Veit ekki. Spurninguna. Þannig að þú var ekki fyrst í spurninguna.
Ok. Á ég að segja frá eitthvað? Já. Getur við hendt hérna inn á tölvuna myndum af Guðunesnu sem alveg myndir hérna af Guðunesnu? So we have a mayor that is very much on it, so he has some pictures of Guðunes that Baltasar didn't bring. Thank you, Dagur, also for this. So we will just keep them rolling as we speak.
I used to be his teacher.
Well, actually, Baltasar taught me tango, so I don't know if we're doing that now.
Yeah, anytime.
I don't know, Loive, if you want me to roll quickly through it before we start the discussion, or?
I was thinking that, or while we talk.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's that comprehensible. It's just briefly, just to put you into the situation, is that Baltasar had this dream, not of being the film capital of Europe or anything, but a film village. Kind of Icelandic scale for local talents, local business, and Reykjavík shared that. Our first meeting about this was probably more than 10 years ago, and a lot of things happened in between, both for Reykjavík, but not least for Baltasar. So it's almost months ago, but a couple of years ago, we were developing a vision for a new part of Reykjavík connected to an old industrial site close to one of the suburbs. And we had an industrial strategy after the crash of the banks, where we were focusing on creative industries among them, and especially cinema, and how we could create optimal situation for the film city. And so now, after some agreements, we have had a planning competition where a very interesting Dutch group won, and they have developed this. So this is the old fertilizer building where that Baltasar has purchased, and as a part of that agreement, they have a first right to develop this north shore of this.
A little further?
A little further? Yeah. No, I think it's here, Baltasar. But at least what we're doing now is we're doing an additional agreement to open it up to be maybe a bit more residential, closer to so it will be a whole mix. So we really have a vision of connecting this to the closest neighborhoods. This is within a very easy boating distance from 101, and a part of the thought is actually to have a boat service to the area. I do not share Baltasar's view that 101 has gone or something. We are working with that, but we totally agree that this new site is raw, with an edge, and we are going to enter into this project in a very free spirit, and that was actually the brand of the winning idea. It would be kind of a for this free spirit-minded innovators of the city. So this are just some kind of references that they are putting up. These are the existing buildings, and some will be new. And we have been working on this quite fast from December 2016, and we are going to have a full proposal in March next year. And this will be the first part of it, and Baltasar's company has acquired the kind of heart of that. And we are taking a huge risk here. We are depending on them to succeed in what they are thinking and they are visioning, because it falls very well to the vision of the city as a creative city that wants to give the film industry and film village a place to grow.
No pressure.
No pressure. But we are connecting to the city as a whole and also to the neighborhoods. So this will be a must-see and a stop, but also very close to nature. We are actually studying, I don't know if Baltasar knows this, to have a pipe of warm, excessive water led down there, so we can have an artificial beach here. So the kind of swimming facilities are not as utopian as you could think. Everybody that has gone to Nauthólsvík knows that we can do those things. So you have to implement Copenhagen there. So we can have. So this will be the capital. Well,
yeah.
We like villages. So
We just come from down under, you know.
Yeah. We wouldn't tell you if we were heading to be a capital, but I could go on. This is a longer kind of presentation of the planning, but we are looking to all sorts of good projects in the world for inspiration, and with Reykjavík Studios at the heart of the project, we are very excited to move it forward as fast as we can. This is in the darkest, as dark as it can get, but it's still glowing. So, this is goodness.
Thank you very much. It's beautiful. If I remember correctly, it was only 3 or 4 years ago the idea came about by politicians to reopen it as a fertilizing factory. But
very different politicians, though.
but you made the right decision. I'm sure we all agree on that. Thank you so much for your really interesting input. I would, and for all of you coming up here to share your experiences and knowledge. Before giving the floor to for the questions, and I must say that we are very short of time. We only have, it seems, only half an hour. I want just very briefly ask Thierry, because you were running this, one of the major studios in Europe for many years, Babelsberg. And now you've heard about the organic growth of the companies here into the studio, and well, maybe one day we'll see it all. There are some other elements that I'm sure you can tell us about, you know. I mean, it's not only about the buildings and a couple of crews. There's more to it.
It's not only about the buildings, but the experience which you are referring to is the revival of the Babelsberg studios. Those were the first big studios which were built in Western Europe next to Berlin at the end of World War I. They were initially conceived as a more modern and larger studio than what existed at the time. There were over 100 different studios in Berlin at the time, but they were all very small, and they were all having problems with the light, because at that time the industrialization generated a lot of dark smokes, and it was difficult to get the proper light to shoot films. So they went about 25 kilometers away from Berlin, next to Potsdam, to create this studio, which politically was meant to become a propaganda instrument. Babelsberg then developed into a landmark in Germany. This was the first studio where they shot speaking films, speaking movies in Europe. The technology came from the US, but The first one in Europe were in Babelsberg, and it became even more of a propaganda tool during the Nazi era. The studio had been bought by Deutsche Bank, and Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda of the Third Reich, had an office in Babelsberg. It still exists in today's buildings. After the reunification of Germany, the studio, which had been not properly maintained, which had still 2,000 people on the payroll, was privatized by the German administration and was acquired by a French group, Vivendi, which you may have heard of. And after a few years, I became the head of Vivendi Germany and consequently of Babelsberg. And what Vivendi had done is spend quite a lot of money to rehabilitate at least partially the studio, spent even more money into ill-designed movie production, and they finally lost €500 million in the process. But what finally happened is that we did manage to put Babelsberg back on its feet, turn it around, make it again a profitable studio. And what I learned in the process is that there is a very fine line for a movie studio between success and failure. Number one, because the profit margins for a studio operation is very, very low. There are too many studio facilities currently in Europe, and the competition is very, very strong. And one of the key drivers of whether you make money or you lose money is the tax rebate, the financial incentives. To give you an idea, in 2002, the UK government decided to end the sale and leaseback system, which allowed for a big part of the financing of film production in the UK. The Pinewood studio, in those days, this was still Pinewood, that was not yet Pinewood Shepperton. The Pinewood studio lost 50% of its turnover instantly. So that tells you what the sale and leaseback was bringing. A number of movies were already shooting, and the end of the sales and leaseback brutally cut off their financing. There were horror stories for a number of producers then, but the impact on the studio was absolutely horrible. In the meantime, they've managed to grow again, but if I can give only a small recommendation to Baltasar: do not overspend on the studio buildings. The studio needs to be dry, dark, soundproof, large, with high ceilings, but he knows all of that better than I do. But the people who have overspent generally do not see their money back. This being said, I wish you luck and I wish you success. You have the big advantage that Iceland is in some way protected against the competition of European studios because you're not right next door. And so it's not so easy to say, like you do in Germany, if I don't shoot in Cologne, I can go shoot on the other side of the border, either in the Netherlands, or I can even decide to go to France or someplace else, to the UK. Here, you're a little bit protected by the distance. Number two, I think that the project we've just been introduced to is different because your idea is to create more than simply a studio, to have residential buildings around, to have a kind of involvement of the city which is different from what we see whether in Pinewood or in Babelsberg or in other studios like Barendorf in the Czech Republic. The second thing that struck me both in Babelsberg and in Cologne and in Pinewood or all of the other studios which I visited is that it's very important and it started already here, to use the studio as a magnet to get a cluster of creative industries, of people who are linked more or less to film, but also to storytelling, gaming, screenwriting, all of the audiovisual industries, because this is a very important part of what can generate enough income to support all of the investments which have to be made. So I think that the experience here is slightly different from what we've seen anyplace else. The closest I can think of is probably Ealing Studios, which is inside the city in London, but it's a very small studio, and in fact, they generate a lot more of their income through real estate. They build a lot of buildings and use the studio, again, as a cluster to attract other people and other industries, and it works. So there is no reason why it wouldn't work here.
Thank you. I think this is definitely going to be a very good and very first opportunity for film studio in Iceland, and also for this cluster, that the creative cluster that we've very often missed here in Reykjavík, Iceland. I would just, Dagur, please, I'm sorry that you could not be from the beginning. We know that you had some other responsibilities, but so you just hesitate to ask if you need some fill-ins. Because we had, like Leon...
Can you run briefly through the four first?
Leon had some really interesting figures about the creative industries and what kind of jobs, highly skilled, educated, innovative jobs that we kind of have already in Iceland, but maybe we have very little data about it. Mm-hmm. We're still in the manufacturing era. I mean, what does the city see in this? Do you see it as a hub for creative jobs, like they've done in Copenhagen? They were looking very much at the growth and employment in the region, or do you see it also as a screen tourism opportunities for Reykjavík? Because until now we have mostly seen Iceland in the nature, less Reykjavík.
Well, when we kind of took a holistic view after the crash of the banks in 2008, we looked at tourism, yes, as one of the kind of pillars of growth. We looked at knowledge-based industries, and we're working heavily with the universities here and the university hospital in developing actually this area as a base for kind of a science camp and knowledge-based industries. But then we looked to kind of green industries and then creative industries. And why did we look at creative industries? It was because we were afraid, as happened to some extent, that the country and the city was losing young talent abroad. And if we would not create an interesting, you might say, young and vibrant city that would kind of could match any city in the world when it comes to quality of life, but also kind of interesting opportunities, we would fail. And the focus on creative industries and the film industry especially was, as we then saw in the years that followed, that the film industry was able to create enormous amount of interesting opportunities in different projects. People showing both talent but also kind of flexibility in doing jobs, taking jobs, creating companies, and kind of making things happen in Iceland that maybe nobody predicted that they could. Although maybe key people within the film industry knew that the talent and technical skills were there. So I think that maybe because we have had this tourist boom, it has overshadowed kind of the extreme growth we've seen within the creative industries. And I actually think that when it comes to competitiveness of a city, it's even more important to have an interesting creative industry and knowledge-based industry than tourism industry when it comes to kind of wages and kind of being an interesting city. That's where I am on this.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Before I give the floor to the audience, Kristen,